Hi, hello yogis, how are we? So I'm Corin Keener. I'm a yoga teacher here in San Francisco, and I generally teach vinyasa, mindful vinyasa to be specific, but today there have been some requests for some basic fundamentals. So I thought what would be really beneficial is going over some very foundational pieces when it comes to knee alignment and how we're being aware of our knee alignment throughout the practice and in various poses. So it will be a pretty short sequencing, but we'll give you hopefully some really good cues to line yourself up for postures where you're going to be as safe as possible and supported as possible, so that ideally what we're trying to do here is once we have a strong foundation in some of these basics, it provides that space to continue to build the practice over time, move through more intermediate and advanced poses, which are always fun once we've done the work to really hone in and establish a really good foundation in the basics. So let's start. We're going to come to the mat and having a blanket nearby if you may need. I have some blocks here today. I'm going to just probably cue through the poses without blocks just because I want to take into account that some people don't have these quite yet. So your choice. If you have them, great. If not, I will do my best to give you some alternatives and how to work without blocks. So let's come to a low lunge. All right, so we're just going to tent the fingers and they're going to frame the right foot. So just start to shift the hips forward and back in space. And we're just using this as a way to understand where we feel the places of imbalance, where do we feel the places of off balance, and then also just becoming more aware of sensation as we're moving in this way. Also, what's happening in the hips? So do we sense any change when the hips come forward? And do we sense any change when the hips come back in space? So sometimes what's happening here is that we're shifting the hips forward. We notice that that right hip is coming a little more forward. And then as we shift the hips back, sometimes we notice that right hip is coming a little more back. So you might be feeling that. Maybe it takes a moment to zone into what that feeling is. So now I want you to try to find the place where you feel evenly grounded through that front foot. And what I mean by evenly grounded is we're feeling the ball of the big toe, the little ball of the toe, and then the heel of the foot, as much as possible, equally grounding and weighting into the earth. Now, as you're doing that, can you press the hips forward just enough so that you feel that front knee aligning right over the front ankle? So this is the ideal alignment, having this nice 90-degree angle. What we really want to caution against is when the knee goes past the ankle. So over time, what this does is this is going to put a lot of strain on the knee, and the negative consequences of this is it could lead to injuries. So we really want to try not to build this habit of having the knee go past the ankle, but either right there, lining up and over it. Sometimes what happens is you need to bring the knee back a little bit. So if you don't have the full range to get to this 90-degree angle, this is totally fine. This is still safe. This is still really supported. So if you are in either one of these variations, just start to notice now what's happening in the hip. So if you feel that right hip coming forward, can you start to draw it back and down so that you can imagine these two hip bones is like their headlights. So they're both facing forward. And then feeling what's happening in that right hip. So we're actually going to take that right thumb and we're going to put it into the inner crease of the hip, so that hip flexor area. So if you can use your thumb to start to drop the hip down in space just a little bit more, and then from there also beginning to peel the hip back if you can. All right, so with the thumb still in that place, in the hip flexor, we're just gonna bring the left hand to the top of the right thigh. All right, so I want us to feel the difference of what's correct, what isn't correct here for a moment. So notice how naturally maybe we want to flail out through the ribs. Instead of doing that, can you start to button the ribs in, pull the navel in, and then with the tailbone, can you tuck the tailbone under a little bit more? So as you're doing that, still maintaining that pulling back, in the right hip. So this is a lot of work. I know it's a lot of cues, but we can start to build on these pieces. The pose really evolves. We can really go deeper from these foundational points. So we're going to start now to bring the hands to the hips. So I think hands to the hips, especially in a place like low lunge, is really helpful and supportive because we can actually feel what's happening in that right hip. Does it feel like it's popping up, or is it right there in that place where it's in line with the left hip? And so over time, if we feel stable and balanced with our hands on the hips, this is when we can start to build and start to reach the arms up overhead. So we're only doing this if the body feels stabilized enough. Stabilized enough as in keeping also that awareness of the abdominals. So this is your balancing point. So constantly keeping the belly drawing in towards the side. All right, so whether the arms are up and overhead or whether to your hips, let's slowly begin to bring the hands down to the mat. And then we're gonna curl back, balls of toes under. Very slowly lift your hips high. We'll come into downward facing dog for a moment. All right, so from downward facing dog, let's start to inhale, reach the right leg. And then exhale, we're gonna bring the foot through in between both hands. Root the back heel, and then we're going to start to evolve open into Virabhadrasana 2. So let's start with the hands on the hips here. Now really important again here with the knee and what's happening in that front knee. So there can be a tendency sometimes for that front knee to look down, right? Do you see that difference? The front knee is looking down. So a good way to know what is safe alignment, what's best alignment here, is that we're finding external rotation in the hip so that that front knee is pointing right over your second and your third toe. Now, what I mean by external rotation is that rather than the inner thighs looking back, we're actually trying to pull the inner thighs to look forward. So part of what will also help you feel into that is I'm going to face you for a moment so you can see the difference. If the tailbone, if the hips are popping out, we're trying to scoop them under and then bending a little more in that front knee, just as we did in low lunge, as much as you can, trying to keep that knee right over the front ankle, never past it, but you can come a little shorter if you need. I'll come right back. All right, so the hands on the hips. Now, what's happening in the space of the hips now? So if we feel one hip poking up, another hip poking up, where is that even balance? Where again, the hip bones, they're like headlights looking forward, balanced. All right, then maybe you begin to pair the arms. We'll just take one more breath here. And then exhale, let's windmill the hands down. Let's begin to square off the hips. And then we're gonna come right back into low lunge, still hands down on the earth. Now let's build. So curling the back balls of toes under, engaging the back leg straight. Now, a lot of similar things that we explored when we were in the low lunge that we're going to explore here in the high lunge. So just start to rock the weight forward, rock the weight back. And then again, we're just finding through this teeter-tottering motion where the hips are in space, where we feel in balance, where we feel off balance. And then finding that sweet spot where, again, the front knee is tracking right over the front ankle. Now notice what's happening in the navel. So if we feel that we're collapsing over the thigh, feel that we're rounding, you start to pull the navel in, draw the shoulders back and down. Continuing to draw the right hip back and down. Good. All right, and then let's just slowly begin to lower the back knee, top of the foot, taking a moment to pause. Okay. So from here, curling back, balls of toes under, lifting the hips high, and downward facing dog. Come down to my knees. Come back to face you guys. So those are just some very basic points to set up. So again, we're really trying to find that front knee is tracking right over the front ankle. So never past it. Of course, it can come a little back, but just setting it up so that we are finding that 90-degree. When we were talking through warrior two, so if we feel that the knee is pointing forward, we're externally rotating the hips so that that front knee is right over the second and third toe. So that's all for today. Thanks for being curious and interested, and stay tuned. I'll do another series if there's other things that you'd like to learn about, other things that are going to support you in these earlier stages. Please do let me know.